The first thing I understood was that silence has weight. It pressed against my chest before I ever opened my eyes. Heavy. Wrong. Too still for a place where machines were supposed to measure life by the second. Then came the antiseptic smell. Cold air against my skin. A faint beeping somewhere to my left. And the strange sensation that I had been gone for a very long time. When I finally forced my eyes open, the light above me fractured into a blur of white and silver. My throat felt scraped raw. My body didn't belong to me yet. Even breathing seemed like something I had to remember how to do. For a few seconds, I didn't know where I was. Then it came back in pieces. Rain on the windshield. Headlights. A hard turn. Metal screaming. After that, nothing. I tried to move my right hand and found N4 taped to my wrist. My fingers trembled. My lips parted, but the sound that came out was barely human. A nurse appeared almost immediately, as if she had been waiting for me to return. "Claire," she said softly, stepping to my bedside. "Don't try to talk too much. You're safe." Safe. It was an odd word to hear when my bones felt like glass, and my mind was full of impact. I swallowed against the pain in my throat. "How long?" Her expression shifted. Not pity exactly. Caution. 15 days. I stared at her. 15 days. More than 2 weeks had been cut out of my life and stitched shut without my permission. My eyes moved to the chair beside the bed. Empty. That was when the unease sharpened into something cold. Because Ethan should have been there. My husband was the kind of man other women described as rare, with that soft envy they tried to hide. Attentive. Polished. The one who remembered anniversaries, sent flowers for no reason, touched the small of my back in public like he was proud of me. The one who always said, "If anything ever happened to you, I'd never leave your side." I looked at the empty chair again. No jacket draped over it. No phone charger plugged into the wall. No half-finished coffee. No Ethan. The nurse checked something on the monitor, but I could feel myself slipping past confusion into a harder kind of awareness. "Where is my husband?" She hesitated. It was small. Just a pause. But I noticed it. That was always my problem and later my advantage. I noticed pauses. Tiny shifts in tone. The things people tried to slide past.
"He was here," she said.
"Earlier in your stay." "Earlier. Not now." I wet my lips. "Call him." Her eyes flicked toward the door. That was the second moment I knew something was wrong. Not because she refused. Because she looked as though she wished someone else would answer for her. A doctor came in 20 minutes later. Mid-50s, composed, expensive glasses, the kind of man private hospitals used to reassure wealthy families that disaster could still be managed elegantly. He explained the injuries first. Concussion. Broken ribs. A fractured collarbone. Internal bleeding that had been caught in time. He told me I was lucky. People always say that when you survive something terrible, they never ask what survival costs. When he finished, I asked the only question that mattered. "Where is Ethan?" This time, nobody pretended not to understand. The doctor folded his hands. "Mrs. Dawson, your husband was informed of your prognosis from the beginning." "Informed," I repeated. My voice sounded thin and damaged. "That's not what I asked." He held my gaze for a second too long. He visited during the first few days. After that, his appearances became inconsistent. I said nothing. The room seemed to contract around me. Inconsistent how? The nurse shifted beside the bed, uncomfortable now. The doctor chose his words carefully, which only made them worse. He expressed concern about the length of your stay. He questioned the necessity of continued monitoring. He requested discharge options earlier than we considered medically appropriate. I stared at him, not understanding at first. My brain rejected the shape of it. He tried to take me out of the hospital? Yes. The word landed harder than the crash ever had. I felt something split open inside me then, not grief, not yet. Something cleaner, more dangerous. Disbelief turning into pattern recognition. Ethan had wanted me released early, while I was unconscious, while I still had tubes in my arms and blood loss in my chart. Why? The doctor's face settled into professional neutrality, but I could see the answer before he gave it. There were repeated disputes regarding billing. For a moment, I honestly thought I had heard him wrong. Billing. Not fear. Not panic. Not desperation to get me home. Money. My husband had stood in a private hospital in Dallas while I lay in a coma and argued about the cost of keeping me alive. I turned my head away from them and stared at the window. The skyline beyond the glass was washed in late afternoon haze, sleek and distant and completely indifferent. "Where is he now?" I asked. No one answered immediately. A silence that has its own language. Finally, the nurse said, very quietly, "We haven't seen him in 5 days." I looked back at her. 5. She nodded once. "His phone?" I asked. "No longer in service." I felt my pulse begin to climb, each beat harder than the last. "His office." The doctor answered this time. "We were told he was unavailable." "Told by who?" Another pause. "His assistant." I almost laughed, but there was no strength in it. Unavailable. My husband had vanished while I was unconscious, leaving a hospital staff to explain my marriage to me in fragments. And in that bright, sterile room, with my body still broken and my mouth full of the metallic taste of survival, I understood something I would spend the next weeks proving in exquisite detail. Ethan had not panicked. He had prepared. And whatever waited for me outside that hospital room, whatever shape my life had been twisted into while I lay motionless under white sheets, I knew with absolute certainty that I was waking up not to recovery, but to ruin. I was discharged 3 days later with a stack of prescriptions, strict instructions, and the kind of pitying smiles people give you when they suspect the worst, but don't want to be the ones to say it out loud. Ethan still hadn't called. Not once. By then I had stopped checking my phone with hope and started checking it like a prosecutor reviews evidence. Missed calls. Messages. Banking alerts. Anything out of sequence. Anything that would tell me where my husband had gone while I was learning how to sit upright without blacking out. There was almost nothing. That bothered me more than chaos would have. A messy man leaves traces. Panic leaves noise. But silence, careful, deliberate silence, meant intent. The driver from the hospital helped me into the back of a town car just after noon. Dallas was bright and polished outside the tinted window. Glass towers. Winter light. Women in heels crossing intersections like they own the city. Normal life moving with insulting efficiency, while mine felt as if it had been pushed off a ledge. I watched the streets change as we drove toward uptown, my stomach tightening with every block. I told myself Ethan might be there. I told myself there would be some explanation so absurd, so temporary, that I would hate him but still understand the outline of what had happened. Traffic delayed us near McKinney Avenue, and by the time we turned onto my street, my collarbone was throbbing and my patience had been scraped raw. Then I saw the townhouse. 3 stories of pale stone and black-trimmed windows, elegant and exact, set back behind wrought iron and trimmed boxwoods. It looked the same from the outside. Still immaculate. Still expensive. Still like the kind of place that promised safety to anyone standing on the sidewalk. The lie of that almost impressed me. The driver carried my bag to the door. I told him I could manage the rest. He hesitated, probably because I looked like a woman held together by pain medication and spite, but eventually he nodded and left. I stood there alone, keys shaking in my hand. The front door unlocked on the first try. Inside, it was so quiet I heard the hinges breathe. At first my brain refused to process what I was seeing. A room can look empty and still not feel wrong. A room can be unfurnished before a move, under renovation, in transition. But this was something else. This was absence with intention. The entry table beneath the staircase was gone. The antique mirror above it gone. The Persian runner that had belonged to my grandmother gone. I took another step. The living room opened in front of me like a wound. No sofa. No armchairs. No marble coffee table Ethan and I had argued over for 2 weeks before buying. The walls were stripped except for pale rectangular shadows where art had once hung. Nail holes stared back at me in crooked little rows. Even the sculptural brass lamps were gone, leaving only dust circles on the hardwood. For a few seconds, I genuinely thought I was in the wrong house. Then I saw the mark on the floor near the fireplace where I dropped red wine during our first Christmas there and never fully managed to sand it out. It was my house.
Or it had been.
I moved farther in, slow and unsteady, every step making the emptiness louder. The dining room was bare except for one broken moving box shoved against the wall. The sideboard my mother gave me when I made partner at 29 was gone. The silver service from my parents' anniversary gift was gone. The crystal candlesticks. The hand-thrown ceramic bowl from Santa Fe.
Gone, gone, gone.
I opened the kitchen cabinets. Half the dishes were missing. The good knives were gone. Even the espresso machine Ethan swore he couldn't live without had disappeared. My pulse started beating in my throat. No, I whispered, and my voice sounded too small in that hollow space.
No.
I forced myself upstairs, one hand on the railing, pain slicing through my shoulder with every step. The second floor was worse because it was personal. The guest room had been cleared out completely. The office was stripped of files, laptops, backup drives, even the framed degrees from my wall. And the primary bedroom. I stopped in the doorway and held onto the frame to keep myself upright. The bed was gone. Not just the mattress. The entire bed. The upholstered headboard I had custom designed.
The nightstands.
The reading chair by the window. Ethan's watch box.
My vanity.
The silk curtains. The cashmere throw folded at the foot of the bench.
Gone.
Our bedroom looked like a staged crime scene after the body had been removed. I went to the closet next. The doors slid open to a vacuum. My clothes had been taken in sections, not all of them. Just enough to leave confusion. Evening dresses missing. Shoes missing. Jewelry cases gone. The hidden safe behind the back panel stood open and empty. That was when the truth hit with full force. This wasn't theft by strangers. This was inventory. Someone had known exactly what mattered. I sank onto the hardwood floor because my legs simply stopped negotiating. Dust clung to the hem of my pants. The closet smelled faintly of cedar and emptiness. My mother's diamond bracelet was gone. My father's watch was gone. The pearl earrings my grandmother wore the day she immigrated to this country were gone. Not valuables.
History.
That was the moment my chest tightened so hard I thought something inside me had torn open for good. While I was unconscious, someone had walked through my life with boxes and tape and decided what pieces of me were worth carrying away. And Ethan, my attentive, careful, polished husband, had either let it happen or let it himself. I looked around the ruined bedroom, at the stripped walls and naked floors and the sunlight falling across all that deliberate absence, and a colder feeling settled beneath the shock. Not grief. Recognition. This had not been a man fleeing. This had been a man dismantling. And standing there in the shell of my own home, I understood that whatever Ethan had done, he hadn't just abandoned me. He had erased me. I stayed on the floor of the closet longer than I wanted to admit. Pain medication blurred the edges of everything, but it couldn't soften the reality around me. The house wasn't robbed in a hurry. Nothing was smashed. Nothing overturned. It had been emptied with care.
Cataloged.
Transported.
Planned.
Eventually, I forced myself to stand. My ribs protested immediately, but anger is a remarkable anesthetic. If Ethan had dismantled my life piece by piece, then somewhere in the wreckage he had left a trail. People always do. I started downstairs. Without furniture, the house echoed differently. Every step tapped across the hardwood like I was walking through an abandoned museum dedicated to someone I used to be. The kitchen drawers were the first place I checked. Half of them slid open to nothing but dust lines. But the third drawer caught for a moment before opening all the way, like something inside had shifted. A crumpled receipt sat in the back corner. I unfolded it carefully. The paper was from a boutique hotel, the Magnolia Grand. 2 guests. 3 nights. My stomach tightened. The date on the receipt was from 9 days ago, while I was still in a coma. The room had been paid with Ethan's personal credit card. I read the second name twice before it truly settled in my mind. Lily Harper. The air seemed to thin around me. Lily. For a moment, I thought my brain was misfiring from exhaustion. The name belonged to a chapter of Ethan's life that had supposedly ended long before I ever appeared. His college girlfriend. The dramatic one, according to him. The woman who never understood stability. The one he had described with a dismissive smile when we first started dating. She lives in Charleston now, he'd told me once, years ago. Totally different life. We haven't spoken in forever. Forever, apparently, had a shorter definition than I realized. I set the receipt down and opened the next cabinet. Empty. The next. Empty again. But when I turned toward the hallway, something pale caught my eye near the baseboard. A scarf. Silk. Soft champagne color with delicate navy stitching along the edges. I picked it up slowly. It didn't belong to me. I knew my clothes the way a musician knows the weight of their own instrument. The texture was wrong. The scent was wrong too, floral and expensive in a way that felt theatrical. I had never worn perfume like that, but I had smelled it once before. 5 years earlier. At a charity event where Ethan had unexpectedly introduced me to a woman with sharp cheekbones and a smile that lingered just a second too long. "Claire, this is Lily," he had said casually. She had hugged him like an old habit. And when she stepped back, the air between them had smelled exactly like the scarf. My hand tightened around the silk. So Lily had been here, in my house, while I was unconscious in a hospital bed. The thought moved through me like a slow blade. I walked into Ethan's former office next. The room had been stripped nearly as thoroughly as the bedroom, but someone had overlooked a slim leather portfolio tucked behind the bottom cabinet. Inside were printed boarding confirmations. 2 tickets. Dallas to Charleston. Departure, 6 days ago. Passenger 1, Ethan Dawson. Passenger 2, Lily Harper. No return flight. My heart was beating so loudly, now I could hear it in my ears. Charleston. Of course. She had always talked about Charleston with that dreamy nostalgia people reserve for places where they imagine their life should have gone. The ocean. Historic houses. Endless summers. A new beginning. Except this one had apparently been funded with my life. I sat down on the bare office floor and kept going through the portfolio. That was when I found the documents. Legal papers. At first glance, they looked legitimate. Structured language, formal headers, notarized stamps. But something about the formatting made my stomach twist. I had spent years as an attorney before leaving corporate law. Certain patterns never leave your brain. The signatures were wrong. Too perfect. Too carefully aligned. My name appeared at the bottom of the primary document. Claire Dawson. Seller. I stared at it until the letters blurred. Seller of what? Then I saw the address. My townhouse. The property had supposedly been sold 11 days ago to something called Redbridge Urban Investments. The purchase price was printed in cold black numbers near the bottom of the page. It took my brain a moment to process the amount, because it was less than half of the home's market value. Less than half. My fingers tightened around the papers. Ethan hadn't just cleared out the furniture. He had sold the house. While I was in a coma, using documents that claimed I had signed them, which meant only one thing.
Forgery.
And not amateur forgery either. This had been prepared by someone who understood legal structure well enough to make it pass initial inspection. Someone who believed I would never be in a position to challenge it. I leaned back against the empty wall, the silence of the stripped house pressing in around me. In 15 days, Ethan had vanished, moved my possessions, transferred my heirlooms, sold my home, and fled across the country with the one woman he promised meant nothing. For a long moment, I simply stared at the forged signature that pretended to be mine. Then something unfamiliar began to settle into place inside my chest. Not panic, not despair, recognition. Because Ethan had made one critical mistake. He thought the woman waking up in that hospital bed was the same woman he had married. The patient one, the accommodating one, the woman who had stepped away from corporate warfare to build a quieter life. But the Claire Dawson who had once terrified fraud departments and dismantled asset thieves for a living. That woman had just found proof of a crime. And somewhere in Charleston, Ethan still believed I was broken. For a long time I sat on the office floor, holding those forged documents. Pain moved through my ribs every time I breathed, but it barely registered. My mind had already shifted into a different gear, the one I had spent years perfecting in conference rooms full of terrified executives and very confident criminals. Pattern recognition, timeline reconstruction, asset tracing. Ethan thought I was waking up weak. Instead, he had handed me a case. I laid the papers carefully on the bare floor and read them again, slower this time. Redbridge Urban Investments. The name alone told me everything. It was the kind of shell company people created when they wanted distance between themselves and a transaction.
Clean.
Generic. Impossible to emotionally connect to any real person. But shells always left fingerprints. The document claimed the property had transferred ownership 11 days ago. The notarization was dated the same morning, which meant Ethan had arranged the sale 4 days after my accident. 4 days after the doctors had told him I might not wake up. The thought should have broken me. Instead, it sharpened my focus. Because if he had waited just a little longer, if he had been more patient, I might have come home to a finished theft without evidence. But Ethan had rushed. And rushed criminals make mistakes. I pushed myself upright using the wall, wincing as my collarbone protested. The house around me still looked hollow and violated, but it no longer felt like a grave. It felt like a crime scene. I found the only remaining kitchen stool and dragged it into the office. My phone had finally regained enough battery to function after days sitting untouched in the hospital drawer. The contact list opened with familiar names. People from my former life. Lawyers, litigators, investigators. Men and women who had once watched me dismantle financial fraud schemes with surgical precision. I scrolled past most of them. There was only one person I trusted to move quickly without asking unnecessary emotional questions. Ryan Calder, former partner, relentlessly calm. The only colleague who had ever told me I was too strategic to stay in corporate defense forever. I pressed call. The line rang 3 times. Claire? His voice carried instant disbelief. Either I'm hallucinating, he said, or someone just resurrected a phone number that's been dead for 6 years. Hello, Ryan. There was a pause. Not awkward. Analytical. You sound like hell, he said calmly. I woke up from a coma 4 days ago. Another pause. Longer this time. Well, he said slowly. That explains the voice. I didn't bother with small talk. My husband forged documents to sell my house while I was unconscious. Silence again. Then a single quiet word. Interesting. Ryan had always had that reaction to disasters. Not horror. Not sympathy. Interest. Shell company buyer. I continued. Half-value sale. Notarized signature that isn't mine. Transaction dated 4 days after my accident. Do you have the paperwork? Yes. Good, he said. Then we're not dealing with speculation. We're dealing with fraud. I leaned back against the wall, feeling the first thin thread of control return to my system. I need an emergency injunction, I said. Immediate property freeze. Block any secondary transfers. You're assuming they plan to flip the asset. They will. Ryan gave a quiet hum of approval. That's the Claire I remember. I closed my eyes briefly. They also cleared out the house. Art, jewelry, documents. Everything. Your husband and his college girlfriend. Ah. The sound he made carried a faint edge of amusement. So this is romantic betrayal and financial crime. A classic hybrid case. Ryan. Relax, he said gently. I'm not minimizing. I'm categorizing. I heard the soft tapping of a keyboard through the phone. First step, he continued, we freeze every account connected to the property transfer. Escrow, receiving banks, shell company registration fees. If the money moved through anything traceable, we choke it. Yes. Second step, we file a fraud alert against the title transfer. That slows down resale. Good. Third step, Ryan said, we examine your husband's financial access. Joint accounts. Several. Not for long. My grip tightened on the phone. You can freeze them? Claire, he said patiently, you used to do this for a living. Of course we can. A strange calm settled over me then. Ethan thought distance would protect him. Dallas to Charleston. A stolen house. A woman waiting on the coast. But financial systems didn't care about geography. Money moved through pipes.
Pipes could be closed.
You'll need to sign some emergency filings, Ryan continued. Can you come into the office tomorrow? I looked around the stripped room again. The empty walls. The missing life. I can't drive yet. I'll send a car. Good. And Claire? Yes. His voice lowered slightly. If your husband ran, he believes the theft is already complete. I open my eyes. He believes you're still unconscious. A thin, cold smile formed despite the ache in my ribs. That's exactly what I'm counting on. Because somewhere in Charleston, Ethan Dawson was probably celebrating his escape. Celebrating the money. Celebrating the future he thought he had stolen. And he had no idea that the woman he left behind in a hospital bed was already pulling the first legal wires that would slowly, carefully, and completely cut off every dollar he thought he owned. The next morning I woke up on the bare floor of my own house. For a few seconds, I didn't remember where I was. Then the pain in my ribs returned, sharp and immediate, and the stripped walls of the bedroom came back into focus.
Right.
My husband had stolen my life. I pushed myself upright slowly. The medication Ryan had told me to take sat beside my phone on the floor. Outside the tall windows, uptown Dallas was already moving. Cars gliding past, people heading to offices, the quiet rhythm of a city that had no idea someone's marriage had just detonated. My phone buzzed. Ryan, tell me you didn't sleep in that house, he said when I answered. I did. You're injured. I'm also angry. He sighed softly. Good, he said. Angry clients move faster. I managed a faint smile. Where are we? Step 1 is already in motion, he said. Emergency filing submitted at 8 this morning. Property transfer flagged as disputed. Title office is reviewing. That fast. You forgot how motivated fraud departments become when a forged signature appears. I lean my head back against the wall. What about the accounts? Working on it, Ryan said. But there's a complication. My stomach tightened. What kind? Your husband separated several financial channels 2 months ago. 2 months. That meant this wasn't a sudden betrayal. This had been building quietly while we were still having dinners together. He moved business funds through a design development account. Ryan continued. Something related to a resort project in Miami. That made sense. Ethan had spent the last year obsessing over a luxury coastal resort proposal. Endless phone calls. Design sketches scattered across the dining table. Late nights, refining presentations for investors. I had believed he was building our future. Apparently, he was building his exit. Do we have access to those files? I asked. Not yet. I stared at the empty bedroom again. That's a problem. Ryan paused. Why? Because if Ethan moved money through the project accounts, we need to know where the intellectual property lives. You're thinking leverage. I'm thinking pressure. Ryan hummed thoughtfully. Interesting angle. I'll call you after I look through what's left here, I said. Claire. Yes. You're recovering from major trauma. I'm aware. Don't do anything reckless. I looked at the stripped room again. Too late. After we hung up, I sat there for a few minutes thinking about the one person who could help with the kind of access I needed. The idea made me hesitate. Not because she couldn't do it. Because we hadn't spoken in 3 years. Jade Mercer. Once my closest friend. Now something more complicated. Back when Ethan and I first started dating, Jade had owned a small vintage record store in Deep Ellum. Dusty vinyl, neon lights, and a tiny espresso bar tucked into the corner. What most people didn't know was that the storage room in the back had slowly evolved into something else entirely. Servers. Custom hardware. A cybersecurity lab hidden behind stacks of old Rolling Stones albums. Jade had always enjoyed secrets. Especially digital ones. I stared at her name in my contacts for a long moment before finally pressing call. The phone rang longer than I expected. Then a familiar voice answered. Claire Dawson, Jade said slowly. This is unexpected. Her tone was calm, but not warm. I need help. That's new. I wouldn't call if it wasn't serious. A pause. What happened? My husband stole my house, forged legal documents, and ran to Charleston with his ex-girlfriend. Another pause. Longer this time. Wow, Jade said softly. You really know how to reopen a conversation. I also think he's been hiding financial movement through a luxury resort development project. Now her voice sharpened. That part interests me. Can you access a remote design archive if I get you a partial login? Probably. I don't just want access, I said quietly. I know. Jade always did. You want damage, she said. Yes. I heard the faint hum of electronics on her side of the call. You're lucky, she said. I'm in the lab right now. Still behind the record store? Where else? A slow breath left my chest. I'll send you everything I find. Claire? Yes. Her voice softened just slightly. Did he really empty your house? Almost completely. Another quiet pause. All right, Jade said finally. Let's ruin him properly. For the next 3 hours, I searched every corner of the townhouse Ethan had missed. Hidden drawers, old USB drives, backup notebooks. Eventually, I found what I needed inside a forgotten document folder beneath the office cabinet. Login credentials, cloud storage references, preliminary resort architectural files. When I sent the information to Jade, she responded 10 minutes later. 3 words. I'm inside. Another message followed seconds later. Claire, you're going to love this. What did you find? I asked when she called. Jade laughed softly. Your husband didn't just move money through this project. What do you mean? He's been stealing design concepts. My pulse quickened. From who? Competing developers, she said. Different proposals. Different architects. He's been blending their ideas together. So, the entire resort pitch is contaminated. Exactly. I closed my eyes slowly. Because that meant Ethan's biggest business opportunity wasn't just fragile. It was legally radioactive. What happens if that information reaches his competitors? I asked quietly. Jade's voice turned almost playful. Oh, she said. The presentation collapses. And his backups? Still sinking to the cloud. I stood slowly, ignoring the pain in my ribs. Can you corrupt them? Already thinking about it. And the timing? Jade didn't hesitate. Whenever you want. I walked to the window and looked out over Dallas. Somewhere far away, Ethan believed he had escaped with money, freedom, and a perfect new life waiting in Charleston. He believed the hard part was over. He believed the woman he betrayed was still recovering quietly in an empty house. But revenge, like finance, works best when timed precisely. Jade, I said calmly. Yes. Find out when his final investor presentation is scheduled. A keyboard clattered on her side of the call. Give me a second. A moment later she laughed. Oh, this is perfect. When? 3 days. I smiled for the first time since waking up. Good, I said. Let's make sure everything he built collapses exactly on schedule. 3 days later, Ethan Dawson's perfect escape began to crack. I didn't see it in person. I watched it happen through numbers. Ryan had set up temporary monitoring on several financial channels connected to the fraudulent property transfer. Not illegal monitoring, just enough visibility through the dispute filings to track when funds moved or bounced. Money always tells the truth first. At 9:14 a.m., the first alert came through. A declined transaction. Location: Charleston, South Carolina. Luxury boutique hotel. Amount: $1,842. I stared at the notification on my phone while sitting in Ryan's office downtown. That's fast, Ryan said, glancing over my shoulder. Too fast, I replied. He leaned back in his chair. Well, the injunction locked the escrow pipeline this morning. If Ethan was planning to access that money directly, he just discovered the pipe is closed. My lips pressed into a thin line, meaning his card just failed. Correct. Ryan's phone rang seconds later. He answered quickly, listened, then muted the call. That was the bank's fraud department, he said. And they just flagged 2 additional attempts. Same card, different ones. That made me smile slightly, because that meant Ethan was standing somewhere glamorous and confused, probably pulling out one card after another while a very patient hotel manager waited. Ryan unmuted the call and spoke briefly, confirming the freeze instructions. When he hung up, he looked almost impressed. You didn't exaggerate about your husband's spending habits. Ethan enjoys appearances, I said calmly. Apparently. Another alert appeared on my phone. Transaction denied. Location: the Palmetto Harbor Resort. Room charge: I imagined it clearly. Ocean view suite. Balcony. Champagne on ice. Lily Harper probably standing beside him in a white summer dress, expecting the beginning of some storybook future. Instead, declined. Ryan tapped something on his laptop. His primary business account is also frozen now. That was quick. Once the fraud claim attached to the property transfer, the bank got nervous. They don't like holding stolen collateral. So, he can't access the sale money.
No.
What about his private reserve accounts? Ryan clicked again. Then he raised an eyebrow. Well. What? Those just locked too. I exhaled slowly. Ethan had always believed financial systems were flexible if you spoke confidently enough. He was about to learn they were not flexible when lawyers started pulling levers. What's he going to do? Ryan asked. I leaned back in the chair. First he'll think it's a technical error. Reasonable. Then he'll try another card. Ryan nodded. Already did. Next he'll call the bank. And they'll tell him there's an active dispute attached to the transaction. Ryan smiled slightly. That should ruin the mood. I looked down at the next alert arriving on my screen. ATM withdrawal attempt.
Declined.
Charleston Harbor District. He's outside now, I said quietly. Ryan blinked. How do you know? People try machines when human explanations fail. Another message appeared. International transfer request.
Blocked.
Ryan leaned forward. Oh, that's interesting.
What?
He's trying to move money from a secondary holding account. Connected to the resort project? Looks like it. Can you stop it? Ryan gave me a look. Claire.
Right.
He already had. For a few minutes we watched the attempts continue.
Cards.
Transfers. Account logins. Every single one blocked. Each attempt a little more frantic than the last. Then my phone buzzed with something new. Unknown number. South Carolina area code. Ryan raised an eyebrow. That was fast. I stared at the phone vibrating on the desk. Don't answer yet, he said. Why? Because right now he's confused. And confusion is the first stage of collapse. The phone stopped ringing, then rang again immediately. Same number. Ryan leaned back. If you answer now, you give him information. I watched the screen flash. Call incoming. Ethan Dawson. My husband. My phone stopped vibrating again. A text message appeared seconds later.
Claire.
Where are you? My hand stayed still. Another message followed. We need to talk. Then a third. Why are my accounts frozen? Ryan laughed quietly. Well, he said, that didn't take long.
I placed the phone face down on the desk.
Let him sweat. Outside the office window, Dallas traffic moved in neat lines beneath the glass towers. Hundreds of people living ordinary lives. Meanwhile, 2 states away, the man who thought he had stolen everything from me was standing in a luxury hotel lobby with a stack of useless credit cards and a girlfriend who was probably starting to ask uncomfortable questions. Ryan's laptop chimed again. He glanced at the screen. Oh, he said. That's beautiful. What now? The hotel just tried to authorize the full suite balance. And declined. I closed my eyes for a moment. Not from guilt. From something much colder. Satisfaction. Because Ethan Dawson had traveled all the way to Charleston expecting champagne, ocean views, and the beginning of a glamorous new life. Instead, in less than 6 hours, his money had vanished.
His accounts had locked. His escape had collapsed.
And somewhere in that elegant hotel lobby, with Lily Harper standing beside him and staff beginning to look impatient, my husband was finally discovering the first simple truth of this entire situation. He hadn't escaped. He had just reached the part of the story where everything started falling apart. The next piece of the truth arrived 48 hours later. By then, Ethan had called 23 times. I hadn't answered once. His messages had evolved in stages. First confusion, then irritation, then anger, and finally something closer to panic. Claire, this isn't funny.
Call me.
Followed by, the bank says there's a fraud dispute. What did you do? And eventually, we need to fix this. I read every message. I just didn't respond. Because by the time Ethan started begging for answers, Ryan had already found something far more interesting. I was sitting in his office again when he slid a folder across the desk toward me. You're going to like this, he said. That's what you said about the last disaster. This one's bigger. I opened the folder. Inside were corporate registration documents connected to the shell company that had supposedly bought my townhouse. Redbridge Urban Investments. On paper, it looked clean. Registered in Delaware. Standard holding structure. Minimal public information. But Ryan had highlighted several sections in yellow. Look at the management chain, he said. I followed the lines carefully. Redbridge Urban Investments was controlled by another entity. Harper Strategic Holdings. My eyes stopped. Harper, I said slowly. Ryan nodded. Recognize the name? Yes. Lily Harper. Ethan's college girlfriend. The woman currently sharing champagne and financial collapse with him in Charleston. That can't be a coincidence, I said. It isn't. Ryan tapped another page. Harper Strategic Holdings is owned by Franklin Harper. Her father? Exactly. I leaned back slowly. The room felt suddenly colder. Franklin Harper was not a small-time investor. His name appeared regularly in business journals, an aging but polished real estate developer who had spent decades building a quiet empire across the Southeast. The kind of man who spoke softly and bought entire city blocks. What's his situation right now? I asked. Ryan slid another document toward me. Public narrative says his company is struggling. Struggling how? Overextended properties. Market contraction. Several assets quietly listed for sale. I frowned. That sounds like a man preparing sympathy. Ryan smiled slightly. Exactly. Franklin Harper had spent the last year presenting himself as a businessman under pressure. Investors believed his empire was weakening, which meant if he suddenly acquired a high-value property cheaply, no one would question it. My townhouse. Sold for half its value. Through a shell company. To a desperate developer looking for liquidity. Except the desperation was theater. Ethan helped them, I said quietly. Ryan nodded. That's the part that impressed me. Impressed you? Your husband wasn't just running away with his ex-girlfriend. He was participating in a structured asset transfer. I stared at the documents again. My accident. My coma. The rushed sale. The shell company. The Harper family. All of it suddenly snapped into alignment. This was never about Charleston, I said.
No.
This was about my property. Ryan leaned back. And your inheritance. My eyes lifted. You looked up the property history? Of course. The townhouse wasn't just real estate. My grandmother had purchased the building decades earlier when uptown Dallas was still rough around the edges. The property had appreciated dramatically over the years. By the time it passed to me, it was worth several million. And unlike many assets, it had no complicated ownership structure. It was clean, liquid, easy to transfer if someone forged the right documents. Franklin Harper gets my house, I said slowly. Ryan nodded. For half price. And Ethan gets rewarded with Lily. With access to Harper business connections, Ryan added. And probably a share of the property value later. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. My husband hadn't just betrayed me for romance. He had negotiated my life like a business deal. Ryan watched my expression carefully. You're taking this well. I'm taking it accurately. He smiled faintly. That's the Claire I remember. I looked down again at the corporate filings. A father.
A daughter.
And my husband. 3 people quietly moving my wealth into their control while I lay unconscious in a hospital bed. But Ryan wasn't finished.
There's more, he said.
Of course there is. The sale documents include a witness signature. I froze. Who? Ryan turned the page. A familiar name sat at the bottom of the notarized form. Adam Pierce. For a moment the office disappeared around me. Adam Pierce. Law school rival.
Brilliant.
Ambitious. And known for cutting ethical corners when he thought nobody was watching. What is he doing in this? I asked. Ryan shrugged. My guess. He authenticated the forged paperwork. That would destroy his license, I said. Yes. Possibly send him to prison. Also yes. I closed the folder slowly. For the first time since this started, the shape of the entire scheme was visible. Ethan hadn't just stolen from me. He had joined a family operation. The Harpers moved money. Adam Pierce created legal cover. And Ethan was the inside man who knew exactly when his wife would be unconscious and unable to stop them. Ryan studied me. You're thinking about Pierce. Yes. He's the weakest link, Ryan said. Exactly. Franklin Harper had money. Lily had loyalty. Ethan had desperation. But Adam Pierce? Adam had something far more fragile. A career. And careers collapse very quickly when the right evidence appears. Ryan leaned forward slightly. What are you planning? I closed the folder and slid it back across the desk. Adam Pierce thinks he signed a harmless witness statement. Ryan nodded. Probably. He believes the transaction is already complete. Yes. And he believes I'm still recovering quietly from a car accident. Ryan smiled slowly. That assumption is going to hurt him. I stood carefully, ignoring the protest in my ribs. Call the ethics board, I said. Ryan raised an eyebrow. Already? Not yet, I said calmly. First we talk to Adam. And if he refuses to cooperate? I looked out the office window at the Dallas skyline. Glass towers reflecting the late afternoon sun. Then we show him exactly how expensive loyalty to the wrong people can become. Because somewhere in this very city, Adam Pierce still believed the fraud he helped create was safe. He believed the victim was weak. He believed the documents were secure. But he had just made one catastrophic mistake. He had signed his real name on a lie that was about to collapse. 2 days later, I walked into Adam Pierce's office. Ryan insisted on coming with me, mostly because my ribs were still healing and partly because he knew Adam well enough to enjoy the moment. Adam's firm occupied 3 floors in a sleek glass building in downtown Dallas. The lobby smelled like polished marble and expensive coffee. Exactly the kind of place lawyers built when they wanted clients to believe success was permanent. The receptionist looked up. Do you have an appointment? Yes, I said calmly. With Mr. Pierce?
No.
She blinked. Then I'm afraid. At that exact moment, Adam stepped out of the elevator behind her. He froze. For a split second, his face drained of color. Because Adam Pierce had heard about my accident. He believed I was still recovering quietly somewhere. Instead, I was standing in his lobby.
Alive.
And holding a black folder. Claire, he said slowly. His voice carried the careful neutrality lawyers use when they feel a threat forming, but haven't identified it yet. Ryan smiled beside me. Adam. Adam recovered quickly, forcing a polite expression. Well, he said. This is unexpected. Is it? I asked. His eyes flicked to the folder in my hand. What can I do for you? I thought we could talk privately. Another pause. Then he nodded. Of course. He led us into his office, closing the door carefully behind us. Adam Pierce had always been meticulous. His office reflected it. Perfectly aligned law books, minimalist desk, framed degrees from prestigious schools. A shrine to credibility. He gestured toward the chairs. Please. Ryan and I sat. Adam remained standing for a moment before finally lowering himself into the chair behind his desk. So, he said, folding his hands. What's this about? I placed the folder on the desk and opened it slowly. Inside were copies of the forged sale documents. Adam's eyes moved across the first page. Then the second. Then the signature line. His own name stared back at him. Adam Pierce. Witness. For the first time since we entered the room, His composure cracked. Very slightly. You witnessed this transaction, I said calmly. Yes. His voice was cautious now. Standard property verification. Interesting. Ryan leaned back in his chair. Adam glanced at him. Why? I slid another page across the desk. Hospital admission records. Date of my accident. Date of my coma. Adam stared at the documents. Then back at the forged sale agreement. Then back at me. I was unconscious when these papers claim I signed them, I said quietly. The room went very still. Adam cleared his throat. I'm sure there's an explanation. Good, Ryan said. We'd love to hear it. Adam straightened slightly, recovering some of his professional confidence. I was asked to witness a legal document, he said carefully. I had no reason to suspect fraud. Who asked you? I said. Adam hesitated. That hesitation was everything. Franklin Harper's office, he admitted. And you didn't find it unusual, I asked, that my signature appeared on a property sale while I was hospitalized? I was told you had authorized representation. By whom? Silence. Adam's jaw tightened. Ryan finally leaned forward. Adam, he said quietly, let's skip the performance. He tapped the folder. You authenticated a forged signature on a multi-million-dollar property transfer. Adam's face hardened. You're making a serious accusation. Yes, I said. And we're about to make it in writing. I slid another document across the desk. Draft ethics complaint. Prepared by Ryan's firm. Addressed to the Texas State Bar. Adam read the first paragraph. Then the second. His breathing slowed. Do you understand what this filing means? I asked. He didn't answer. Ryan did. It means an investigation. Which means subpoenas. Which means discovery. Adam looked up. You're bluffing. I shook my head slowly. No. I placed one final document on the desk. A sworn affidavit. Prepared but unsigned. Sign this, I said calmly. Adam stared at it. What is it? A declaration confirming that the Harper family requested the forged witness verification. His eyes widened. You want me to testify against them? No, I said quietly. I want you to tell the truth. Adam leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling for a long moment. His entire career hung in that silence. If he refused, the ethics complaint would destroy him. If he cooperated, Franklin Harper's entire property scheme would collapse. Ryan checked his watch casually. We can file the complaint in about 15 minutes. Adam exhaled slowly. You've always been ruthless, Claire. I met his eyes. No, I said calmly. I've always been precise. He looked at the affidavit again. His hand hovered over the pen. Then finally, he signed. The sound of ink on paper felt louder than it should have. Adam dropped the pen. This will destroy Franklin Harper, he muttered. Probably, Ryan said. And Ethan Dawson, Adam added quietly. I closed the folder. Yes, I said. Especially Ethan. Because with Adam's declaration, the forged sale collapsed instantly. Ryan filed the injunction within the hour. The property transfer froze. The shell company's ownership claim vanished. And the Harper family's carefully constructed scheme began unraveling piece by piece. All because one man had made the single mistake every fraud eventually depends on. He had written his real name on a lie. The unraveling started immediately. Within hours of Adam Pierce signing the declaration, Ryan filed the motion that froze the fraudulent property transfer. The title office flagged the townhouse as legally disputed, and the shell company that had briefly claimed ownership suddenly found itself under investigation. Franklin Harper's lawyers began calling that same afternoon. Ryan didn't answer. Let them sweat, he told me. For the first time since the accident, I returned to the townhouse that evening not as a victim, but as someone reclaiming territory. It was still empty, still hollow, but now the silence felt different. The house was no longer a grave. It was evidence. My phone buzzed as I walked through the stripped living room. Unknown number again. Charleston. This time, I answered. Claire. Ethan's voice sounded strained, thinner than I remembered. Hello, Ethan. The silence on the line lasted several seconds. You're awake. Yes. When? Days ago. Another pause. You didn't tell me. I walked slowly across the living room floor, past the dust outlines where our furniture had once stood. You didn't ask. His breath came through the phone louder now. What did you do to my accounts? Your accounts. You know exactly what I mean. I froze. Stolen assets. That money isn't stolen. Really? I said calmly. Because the documents say otherwise. His voice sharpened. You're overreacting. I stopped walking. Am I?
Yes.
Claire, this whole thing is a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding that involved forged property documents? You signed those. No, I said softly. I didn't. Ethan exhaled sharply. Look, we can fix this.
We?
Yes. I almost laughed. You mean you and Lily? He hesitated. That was confirmation enough. You left the country with her. I continued calmly. We came to Charleston to think. About my house?
No.
About the money? You're twisting things. I looked around the empty room again. The missing paintings. The stripped walls. The hollow echo. No, I said quietly. You already twisted them.
His tone changed then.
Less confident. Claire, things got complicated. Did they? Yes. You tried to sell my home while I was in a coma. Another silence. Finally, he said quietly. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. I closed my eyes briefly. There it was. Not denial. Regret about the timing. Where are you right now? I asked. At the hotel. Still. Yes. That must be expensive. His voice turned bitter. You froze my accounts. Yes. You're ruining everything. No, I said calmly. You already did that. Ethan breathed heavily on the other end of the call. What do you want? Finally. The correct question. I want you back in Dallas. For what? To finish this properly. Another pause. And if I don't come? I walked slowly toward the window. The Dallas skyline shimmered in the evening light. Ryan had warned me Ethan might try to hide. But Ethan had always been arrogant. Arrogant men hate unfinished arguments. If you don't come, I said quietly, the fraud case proceeds without you. And the Harper family becomes the primary target. His breath caught. That was the lever. Franklin Harper already knows about the injunction. I continued. He also knows Adam Pierce signed a sworn declaration. The silence that followed was heavy. You're bluffing, Ethan said. I'm not. And if you push this, he said slowly, you destroy everyone. I leaned against the window frame. Not everyone. Another long pause. Then finally, what do you want me to do? Come home. And sign the divorce papers. Ethan laughed bitterly. That's it.
No.
What else? You return every asset you took. That's impossible. No, I said. It's very possible. And if I refuse? I let the silence stretch for several seconds. Then I answered. Then the fraud investigation becomes criminal. Ethan swore under his breath. You're ruthless. No, I said quietly. You just underestimated me. The call ended 10 minutes later. 2 days after that, Ethan Dawson walked back into Dallas. Ryan arranged the meeting in the one place Ethan couldn't avoid the truth. The townhouse. He arrived in the late afternoon. The house was still empty, still stripped, still echoing, which made the moment even better. Ethan stepped through the doorway slowly, looking around the hollow space. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked smaller, not physically, but morally. You did this, he said quietly. No, I replied. You did. Ryan stood nearby with the paperwork. Divorce agreement. Asset recovery statement. Fraud liability waiver. Ethan stared at the documents. You're leaving me with nothing. No, I said calmly. I'm leaving you with what you actually earned. His hands shook slightly as he picked up the pen. Lily thinks you've lost your mind, he muttered. Lily doesn't matter. He signed the first page. Then the second. Then the final document. The pen scratched loudly against the paper in the empty room. When he finished, he dropped it onto the bare floor. Happy? He asked bitterly. I looked around the stripped house. The place he had tried to steal. The life he had tried to erase. Then I met his eyes. No, I said calmly. Just finished. Because I hadn't destroyed Ethan Dawson. He had done that himself, the moment he believed I would never wake up. After Ethan signed the papers, the house went quiet again. Ryan left first, carrying the legal documents that officially ended my marriage and returned control of my property. Ethan stood in the doorway for a moment longer, like a man who had lost track of how he arrived somewhere he no longer belonged. Then he walked out.
Just like that.
No dramatic speech. No final argument. Only the hollow sound of the front door closing behind him. For the first time since waking up from the coma, I was alone in the house without ghosts. I walked slowly through the rooms again. The walls were still bare. The floors still empty. But the place didn't feel violated anymore. It felt unfinished. Like a foundation waiting for something better. My phone buzzed.
Jade.
You busy? She asked when I answered.
No.
Good, she said. Because I've been digging through the wreckage of Ethan's project. The Miami resort? Yeah. I leaned against the kitchen counter, staring at the empty cabinets. And, you remember how we corrupted his backups before the presentation? Yes. Well, I kept copies. Of course she did. What kind of copies? I asked. The interesting kind. Jade had always been precise with language. What did you find? A lot, she said. Financial models, investor contacts, location feasibility studies, coastal zoning approvals. I straightened slightly. Those aren't small things.
No, she said.
They're months of work. Work Ethan had been using to build the resort proposal he believed would make him wealthy. Except now that project was dead. Because after Jade leaked fragments of the stolen designs, 2 competing firms had threatened litigation. The investors pulled out immediately. The presentation collapsed within hours. And Ethan's entire development plan evaporated overnight. But the research still existed.
And now?
It belonged to me. What are you thinking? Jade asked. I walked slowly into the empty living room again. Through the tall windows, I could see Dallas glowing in late afternoon light. For weeks, my entire focus had been survival. Then revenge. But revenge was finished. Now came something else. Opportunity. The Miami project won't work anymore, I said. Too contaminated, Jade agreed. But the concept is still good. Luxury coastal immersion resort. Yes. Jade laughed softly. You're thinking about rebuilding it. I'm thinking about improving it. Where? I already knew the answer. Savannah. Georgia. Untapped coastal development zones. Historic tourism. Strong investor interest. Jade was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You're serious? Yes. Claire, she said slowly, this would mean starting an entirely new company. I know. And pitching the same investor groups Ethan failed with. Yes. That's bold. No, I said calmly. It's efficient. Because Ethan had already done the hardest part. He had gathered the research, contacted the investors, identified the opportunity. All I had to do was execute it better. Jade whistled softly. You're cold.
No.
I'm practical. 2 weeks later, Blackshore Ventures was registered. Ryan helped structure the legal framework. Jade built the digital infrastructure. And I began calling the same investors Ethan had once tried to impress. The conversations went differently this time. Because my proposal wasn't stolen ideas stitched together from competitors. It was clean, focused,
strategic.
An immersive coastal destination built around historic architecture, environmental preservation, and luxury retreat experiences. Savannah City Council approved preliminary development discussions faster than expected. The investors followed soon after. One afternoon, 3 months after Ethan signed the divorce papers, I stood inside a conference room overlooking the Savannah River. Across the table sat 4 major development investors. They studied the architectural renderings projected on the wall.
Glass.
Stone. Ocean views. An entire destination. This project, one of them said slowly, feels ambitious. Yes, I replied. Another investor leaned forward. You said the concept evolved from a previous development proposal? In a way. And what happened to that original developer? I smiled slightly. He made some strategic mistakes. The room chuckled softly. Then the lead investor closed the folder in front of him. Blackshore Ventures, he said. That's your company? Yes. He nodded once. We're in.
Just like that.
The deal Ethan had spent a year chasing became mine. 6 months later, the first public announcement appeared in the financial press. Blackshore Ventures secures major Savannah coastal development deal. I read the headline once, then set the newspaper down, because by that point the story had already moved beyond revenge. Ethan had tried to steal my life. Instead, he had unknowingly built the foundation of something far larger. And as construction began along the Georgia coast, I understood one final truth about everything that had happened. Sometimes destruction isn't the end of a story. Sometimes it's the blueprint for something better. For a while, I believed the war was over. Blackshore Ventures was moving faster than anyone expected. Construction permits cleared. Investors expanded their funding. The Savannah project began transforming from architectural renderings into real steel and stone along the coastline. My life had rebuilt itself in ways I never imagined while lying in that hospital bed. Ethan had disappeared quietly after the divorce. Lily Harper returned to Charleston with him, but their relationship didn't last long once the money vanished. Franklin Harper faced regulatory scrutiny after the fraudulent property scheme collapsed. Everyone scattered. Everyone lost. Justice, in its quiet way, had already happened. At least that's what I thought. Until the police called. It was a Thursday afternoon when the detective arrived at my office. Blackshore Ventures had just moved into a renovated historic building near Savannah's riverfront. The windows overlooked the water, where cargo ships moved slowly past the city skyline. The detective introduced himself as Daniel Ruiz. Miss Dawson, he said politely, sitting across from my desk. I'm sorry to bring this up months later, but we've reopened the investigation into your car accident. The word accident made something tighten in my chest. That happened in Dallas, I said. Yes, he replied. But new evidence surfaced. What kind of evidence? He opened a thin case folder. Traffic camera footage. I frowned slightly. There weren't any witnesses. Correct, Ruiz said. But we recently gained access to several private security feeds from nearby buildings.
He slid a photograph across my desk.
A still frame from a street camera. 2 vehicles.
Mine.
And another car behind it. The moment before impact. I felt my pulse slow. What am I looking at? Ruiz pointed to the second vehicle. This car accelerated. So, it accelerated directly into you. I stared at the image. You're saying the crash wasn't an accident? No, he said quietly. It wasn't. The room felt suddenly colder. Who was driving the other car? I asked. Ruiz turned the page. Another photo. A clearer angle. And beneath it, a name. Adam Pierce. For a moment, I genuinely thought I had misread it. Adam. Yes. That doesn't make sense. Ruiz folded his hands. According to bar records and witness statements, Mr. Pierce had been under professional stress around that time. Stress? Several ethics complaints were pending against him. My mind moved quickly. The forged property documents. The Harper deal. The legal shortcuts Adam had taken for years. All of it catching up to him. But why hit my car? I asked. Ruiz met my eyes. Because you threatened his future. I remembered the night of the crash. Driving home late. Rain on the windshield. Headlights behind me. Adam had known the Harper property transfer involved risk. He had known I was the one person who could destroy the entire scheme. And when I confronted him, when I made it clear I would expose everything, he panicked. Was he drunk? I asked. Yes. That explained the reckless impact. But not the intention. Ruiz closed the folder. Mr. Pierce was arrested this morning. The words settled slowly. Where? In Dallas. For attempted vehicular assault. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the photograph again. The crash that had almost killed me. The coma that allowed Ethan to dismantle my life. The entire chain of betrayal. It hadn't started with Ethan.
It had started with Adam.
A desperate lawyer who believed eliminating me would protect his future. Instead, it had triggered everything. The coma, the betrayal, the revenge, and the new life I had built afterward. Ruiz stood. I thought you deserved to know. Thank you, I said quietly. After he left, I remained in my office for a long time. Outside, the Savannah River moved slowly beneath the afternoon sun. Construction cranes stood in the distance along the coastline where Blackshore's resort would soon rise. My phone buzzed with investor updates, construction approvals, financial reports, a future still expanding. And somewhere in a Dallas holding cell, Adam Pierce was finally confronting the consequences of the one reckless decision that started it all. I stood and walked to the window. The ocean breeze carried the smell of salt into the city. Everything that had happened, the coma, the betrayal, the war for my life, had nearly destroyed me. Instead, it had rebuilt me. Stronger, sharper, unbreakable in ways I hadn't been before. I didn't destroy Ethan. I didn't destroy the Harpers. And I certainly didn't destroy Adam Pierce. They all did that themselves. The moment they believed I would never wake up.